I'd like to show you a game from the Sinquefield Cup 2025. The first time I've dipped into this tournament, and as ever, there's a great lineup. So it feels to me like there's a bit of an older generation and a younger generation playing here. So older generation, we've got Levon Aronian, Maxime Vacher-Legrave, Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So. Younger generation, we've got the world champion, Gukesh, Pragyanananda, Abdusattorov, Firuz Jah. And then more in the middle, we've got Samuel Sevian and Jan-Krzysztof Duda. So it's an intriguing lineup, and it's been some fascinating games so far. I'd like to show you a game between Abdusattorov and Caruana. It's Queen's Gambit exchange variation, and I know a lot of players struggle with black against this. It is, of course, a very reliable system for white, but the line that Caruana plays is very trendy. And I actually looked at this a few months ago for one of my Patreon opening surveys. So if you want to take a look at that, then do sign up to Patreon. Yeah, this is a fascinating game, a real slugfest actually, with both players attacking. So let's dive in. Abdusattorov playing white, 20 years old, from Uzbekistan, already in the top 10 in the world, and Fabiano Caruana playing black. So Queen's Gambit declined. Abdusattorov exchanges on d5, exchange variation, and bishop g5. Lots of different ways to play this with black, but I think this is a very intriguing line. So first of all, Caruana flicks in h6. Sometimes it's not very good to have the pawn on h6. It can weaken the king side, but in some variations it's very useful to have the pawn there. Bishop g4. So this is the trendy line that I mentioned in the intro. So it's quite a provocative move. You know, what you would like to do is you're provoking f3, and when this happens, the bishop would come back to e6, and with this pawn on f3, what you want to do is go for a very quick c5, because if this is ever exchanged, then you can see e3 starts to look a little bit shaky. So that's one of the ideas. So it's quite a provocative move. Notice that that pawn has remained on c7. It's not on c6 yet. So black has this option to play c5 in one move. And if white exchanges pieces, then that's just relieved some congestion in black's position. So that's reasonable. Carlsen has actually played like this with black. And the other important move to consider is queen b3. Looking at two pawns, which at first glance looks like it could be pretty good for white. But actually after this move, black is fine, because queen b7 allows black to break through here. You can see that white's king is a long way from getting to safety on the king side, whereas black is already about to castle. That's really dangerous for white. So that's sometimes you can tempt your opponent into playing in that way. But Abdusattorov plays queen c2, good idea. It's the usual square for the queen in this line. Claiming this diagonal. Castles, and then he pushes the bishop back. And knight f3. Well, this is already a very, very interesting moment in the game. And I think we're going to have our first think and drink moment. So I'd like you to have a think. How do you play as black in this position? Black to play. And I'm going to have a lovely drink of tea in my battered Brentford mug. Cheers. Well, of course, it's possible to play a normal developing move like knight d7, or maybe c6 first. But Caruana played knight e8, and I really like this move. I've always loved playing the Queen's Gambit, and one of the strategies which comes into play in so many different variations, I mean there are so many different systems that black can play, is the idea to exchange these dark squared bishops. That is really important. If white were to exchange, that just clears the deck for black. You know, these two knights are going to come into play very quickly, and the rooks are connected. And black can just breathe a lot easier once those bishops are exchanged. Just gives black more freedom to maneuver. So understandably, Abdusattorov ducked the exchange. And then you're kind of thinking, well, what's that knight doing on e8? Watch. Bishop d6. So Caruana is chasing that bishop. And it's a tricky decision for white, because you don't want to exchange. Again, exchanging these dark square bishops is beneficial for black, but also brings the knight to this beautiful square d6. Again, one of those dream squares for the knight in the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. So if white doesn't exchange, well, what do you do? Well, you can see that that pawn has moved to h3, so that bishop on g4 tempted the pawn forward. It's gone back to e6, but it's not clear that having the pawn on h3 is actually beneficial for white, because it means that black can damage the pawns. It would be better to have the pawn on h2. Isn't that funny? So white has to make a decision. I mean, you could go back, but that's an invitation for a draw, or indeed black could play on, damage the pawns, play queen d6. That's a little bit awkward for white. You know, these pawns don't look very good. So what did Abdusattorov do? Well, he didn't want to exchange. He just played bishop d3. Oh, incidentally, another option is knight e5. But black can start the process of exchanging pieces with knight c6. Just threatening to get rid of this knight. Exchange it off. So anyway, bishop d3 played. So Caruana took the opportunity to exchange those bishops off and damage white's pawn structure. I think if I were black, I'd be delighted with the outcome of the opening. So why is Abdusattorov playing like this? He's a fine strategist. He understands that his pawn structure has been damaged a little bit. The point is this: g4. He's gambling. He wants to open up the king's side using that g-pawn as a battering ram. And it's a really interesting strategy. It's risky because now e3 is a chronic weakness. c5. Excellent play from Caruana. You know, if he just sits there, then white does have the opportunity to open up the king's side. So he needs counterplay. Now, here's the next big decision for white. Where would you put the king? It's getting to that point where it feels a bit breezy in the middle of the board. So would you castle kingside or queenside? What would your choice be? I think we've got another think and drink moment. Cheers. Well, Abdusattorov played castles queenside. And that really raises the stakes, because the king on c1 isn't as secure as it might be, with that c-file potentially opening. I think a much safer move would have been castles kingside, and white still has the opportunity to attack. So, for example, knight d6, queen f2. Queen comes to g3 and potentially g5. Now, this is just a very double-edged position. But it seems to me this is a lot safer than having the king on c1, and the rooks are connected all the same. But castle's queenside played. Rook c8, obviously, when the queen and king are lined up like this, that's a natural one. In fact, it's still not so clear. g5. Now, this was clearly Abdusattorov's intention when he castled queenside. You know, he's looked into this carefully. If this is taken, well, in fact, Caruana exchanged first and then took. It's not clear this is the best move, actually. He could have set things in motion already with b5. But Caruana took. First glance looks okay, because if h4, then g4, and the position remains relatively closed. But that's why Abdusattorov played g4, blocking the g-pawn, and ready to play h4. And in that way, he'll be able to open the h-file. So this is very, very aggressive. And for the moment, white is actually secure. Okay, so g6 played by Caruana. He's worried about the attack, so wants to block that diagonal, and potentially he can just move the king up. Bishop takes g6. Well, you better not take that, because then the queen will get into the danger zone, and that's dreadful. So queen f6. So once the queen comes over, then it can help to protect the king. And you can see two pieces are threatened. Bishop check. Okay, so the bishop is safe. And rook f1 protecting the knight. But black has just a little bit of time now. And b5 comes, finally. And you can see with the king and queen lined up here, then b4 starts to be a serious threat. So, I mean, this is very interesting. Abdusattorov ignores that and just plows on the king side. So it's a game of chicken. Who's going to crack first? b4. Takes on g5, a check, king b1, and pawn takes knight. So Caruana is now a piece up, but the position is on fire. Bishop f5. Okay, watch out potentially for a check down here. So rook h8. Exchanged off. Bishop takes e6. A check. In fact, black is absolutely fine here. More than fine. Although these checks look terrifying, they're going nowhere. After this check, for example, that forces an exchange of queens. See, this is the problem, that white is attacking when the king is rather exposed, and that gives back the opportunity for, you know, this saving check, exchanging queens, and black is winning. The game went rook h7. Checking doesn't do any good. The king can simply run away. g6 and knight f6 was the final move of the game. Black is still a piece up. In fact, the knights are secure. After a check, there's nothing going on. I mean, white would love to move this knight into the attack, but I'm afraid that would just be the end of that, and make next move. Really interesting game, and there was a lot going on. I mean, I've barely touched the complications there, but just coming back to this position, white is still okay. In fact, this very natural move, bishop takes pawn, according to the computer, is a mistake. It certainly turned out very well for Caruana. Queen d2 would have been better. So that slips out of the danger here and threatens g5. It's just a very unclear position. But this would have been a better way for white to play, because it's possible for the king just to slip out of trouble, and white wouldn't lose material. But completely wild position. So I think this is a very interesting way to play. So don't play c6, just play bishop e7, throw in h6, and then bishop g4. And as we saw, one of the points of playing like this with h6 is that in this position, that bishop can't escape the exchange after this one. Very useful to have the bishop on h4, and yeah, you keep chasing that bishop. As I mentioned, strategically it's very desirable for black to exchange the dark squared bishops. Hope you enjoyed that. I've got a really busy time over the next week or so, so I don't know whether it's going to be possible for me to record any more from the Sinquefield Cup, but anyway, I'm sure I'll return to it at some point. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that. I forgot to say, Caruana's actually leading the tournament after 4 rounds with 3 out of 4. I'm sure you'll find all the details at your favourite website.